The hum of Titan's Spire Station echoed with the vibrant energy of dozens of species mingling under its vast domed roof. Humans were one of the newer arrivals to the galactic community, and though they had carved out a respectable reputation, they were still often underestimated by the more established, larger species. Ethan Walsh was no stranger to this perception. Walking into the grand hall of the diplomatic wing, he adjusted his jacket and scanned the room. He stood out, not because of his stature, but because of his calm demeanor. While others carried themselves with loud bravado, Ethan exuded a quiet confidence. It was something he had learned during years of navigating interstellar negotiations. Being underestimated was often his greatest strength. Today, he was part of a crucial diplomatic team representing Earth, but the spotlight wasn't entirely on him. Most eyes were on Kisara of the Rastari, a towering alien diplomat whose reputation as both a warrior and a strategist was well known. Her deep purple skin shimmered under the station's artificial lighting, and her crystalline horns reflected a sharp intelligence. The Rastari were a species of immense physical power, and Kisara embodied their strength perfectly. When Ethan approached the negotiation table, Kisara's golden eyes locked onto him. She leaned back in her chair, her posture relaxed but commanding. "So this is humanity's representative." Her voice was smooth yet carried a teasing edge. "I expected someone bigger." There were chuckles from a few other species gathered nearby, but Ethan simply smiled, unfazed. And here I thought the Rastari appreciated cleverness over size. Or am I mistaken? Kisara's eyebrows arched, a flicker of amusement crossing her face. "Oh, we do. But cleverness only gets you so far when faced with strength." She leaned forward slightly, her height making her loom over the table. "Tell me, human, do you believe your cleverness can match the might of my people?" Ethan met her gaze evenly. "It's not a matter of belief. It's a matter of perspective. Strength isn't just about muscles." The crowd murmured at his response, a mixture of surprise and interest rippling through the room. Kisara tilted her head, studying him like a puzzle she was eager to solve. The negotiations began, but the underlying tension between Ethan and Kisara added a unique energy to the discussions. Kisara's jabs were subtle but persistent, her words occasionally straying into personal territory. Ethan handled them with practiced ease, countering her remarks with humor and logic that made others smile. As the talks went on, it became clear that Kisara wasn't just testing Ethan's diplomatic skills. She was testing his character. She pushed, probed, and occasionally let her teasing stray into condescension, but Ethan never wavered. During a break in the session, Kisara approached Ethan at the refreshment table. She picked up a crystalline drink, its liquid glowing faintly. "I'll admit," she said, "you're more resilient than I expected. Most humans I've met crumble under pressure." Ethan poured himself a cup of black coffee from a dispenser, the earthy aroma rising into the air. "Maybe you've been meeting the wrong humans." He took a sip, letting the warmth calm his thoughts. "Or maybe you've underestimated us." Kisara chuckled, her laugh a deep melodic sound. "Underestimating isn't the same as dismissing, little human. Your kind has potential, I'll grant you that. But you're still small, fragile. What can you possibly achieve against a galaxy that respects only the strong?" Ethan placed his cup down, his expression thoughtful. "Strength comes in many forms, Kisara. And if there's one thing humans are good at, it's adapting." She narrowed her eyes, intrigued by his response. "Words are easy, Ethan. Action is harder. Perhaps one day you'll have the chance to prove yours." The conversation ended there, but the unspoken challenge lingered between them as the talks resumed. As the session concluded, it was clear the negotiations were far from over. The Rastari were formidable allies, but their pride often clouded their judgment of others. Ethan knew winning Kisara's respect and her trust would be critical for humanity's position in the alliance. When he left the grand hall that evening, he couldn't help but smile. Kisara thought she had the upper hand, but Ethan saw her teasing for what it was, a test. And if there was one thing humanity had proven time and again, It was their ability to rise to a challenge. The stage was set for something more than diplomacy. This was a clash of ideals, and Ethan was determined to show the galaxy what humans were truly capable of. The atmosphere of Titan Spire Station was unusually lively. Word of the verbal sparring between Ethan and Kizara had spread, and it seemed the entire diplomatic wing was buzzing with gossip. Many found it amusing, an unassuming human standing toe-to-toe with a Resteri warrior. Few believed it would amount to anything significant. Ethan, however, had other plans. The next day, as the second round of negotiations began, Kizara was back in her seat at the head of the Resteri delegation. Her golden eyes sparkled with mischief, and her relaxed posture hinted at her confidence. "You seem particularly quiet today, human," she said, her deep voice carrying across the room. "Have I finally worn down your cleverness?" Ethan smirked, folding his arms. "On the contrary, I've been thinking. You've spent quite a bit of energy reminding me how small and fragile my species is. It makes me wonder if you're just trying to convince yourself." A ripple of surprised laughter spread through the room. Kizara tilted her head, her horns catching the artificial light. "Interesting. Go on, Ethan Walsh. What are you suggesting?" He took a step forward, confidence in every movement. "You've made it clear you think humans can't measure up to the Restari. I think it's time we put that belief to the test." The room fell silent. Even the alien delegates, who had largely remained spectators, leaned in closer. A challenge. This was unusual, especially during diplomacy talks. Kizara raised an eyebrow. "A test, you say? And how exactly do you propose to match yourselves against a species like mine?" "A competition," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "A series of challenges to prove what humans are capable of. Something that doesn't just measure brute strength, but also adaptability, intelligence, and resilience." Kizara's lips curved into a smile, half amused and half intrigued. "You're serious?" "Completely," Ethan said, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Unless, of course, you're afraid a small human might embarrass a mighty Resteri." The room erupted in murmurs. Kizara's smile widened, and she leaned forward, her hands resting on the table. "You're bold, Ethan. I'll give you that. But boldness isn't enough to survive Resteri challenges." "Very well, I accept." Ethan's heart raced, but he kept his expression calm. This was exactly the reaction he'd hoped for. "What kind of competition are we talking about?" asked an alien delegate, his reptilian eyes blinking curiously. Kizara leaned back in her chair, already thinking ahead. "We'll take this to Rastar Prime, my homeworld. It's a place where strength and skill are truly tested. 3 trials, 1 for survival, 1 for strength, and 1 for strategy. The winner will prove their superiority." "3 trials?" Ethan asked, his voice calm despite the stakes rising. "Unless you think it's too much for a fragile human," Kizara teased, her tone laced with challenge. Ethan chuckled. "Not at all. But I think we should add something to make it interesting." "Oh." Kizara leaned forward again, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" "A wager," Ethan said, his tone deliberate. "If I win, the Restari will agree to Earth's proposed alliance terms without further debate." The crowd murmured again, and Kizara's golden eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "And if you lose?" "Then Earth will accept the Restari terms," Ethan replied. No questions asked. It was a bold gamble. The alliance with the Restari was crucial for humanity's position in the galactic community, but Ethan knew this was his chance to earn their respect. Kizara studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. The wager is set. But I warn you, Ethan Walsh, Rastar Prime is not a place for the faint of heart. You'll wish you stayed on your comfortable little planet." Ethan smiled. "I guess we'll find out." 2 days later, Ethan and Kizara stood at the dock as a massive Resteri cruiser prepared to take them to her homeworld. The station was alive with activity, and a small crowd had gathered to see them off. Kizara, dressed in sleek armor that shimmered like polished obsidian, turned to Ethan. "Are you ready for this, human?" she asked, her teasing tone still present. Ethan, in simple but durable expedition gear, adjusted his pack. "I was born ready," he replied with a grin. As they boarded the ship, the tension between them was palpable. For Kizara, this was an opportunity to showcase Rasteri's superiority. For Ethan, it was a chance to prove that humanity was more than what others assumed. As the ship departed, the stakes were clear. This was no longer just about diplomacy. It was a personal challenge, a battle of ideals between two vastly different beings. And though neither would admit it, both felt a spark of excitement at the thought of what lay ahead. The journey to Rastar Prime was long and arduous. As the Rasteri cruiser cut through the vastness of space, Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of the challenge ahead. He had read plenty about Rasteri culture, how their warriors were legends across the galaxy, feared for their strength, skill, and endurance. The environment on Rastar Prime was harsh and unforgiving, much like the people. When the ship finally descended into the planet's atmosphere, the view was breathtaking. The surface of Rastar Prime was a mix of jagged mountains, endless deserts, and thick, treacherous forests. The landscape was beautiful in its own dangerous way, a perfect reflection of the people who called it home. Kizara stood beside Ethan as the ship landed, her eyes glinting with excitement. "Welcome to Rastar Prime, human. I hope you're ready for what comes next." Ethan kept his expression neutral, though his heart raced with anticipation. "I'm ready," he replied simply. The moment they stepped off the ship, the heat of the planet hit them. The air was thick, the pressure higher than Earth's, and the sun blazed overhead. Rasteri warriors, clad in light armor and carrying weapons, stood in formation, ready to escort the challengers. Kizara led the way, her large frame moving with confident strides. Ethan followed, trying not to look intimidated by the vastness of the landscape and the imposing presence of the Rasteri. They had already told him that there was no turning back once the trials began. The first trial would take place in a massive, shifting maze deep in the heart of the mountains. The maze was notorious for its ever-changing paths, dangerous wildlife, and harsh environmental conditions. Only those with the strongest survival instincts and the sharpest minds could make it to the center. "We start at dawn," Kizara said, looking back over her shoulder at Ethan. "The maze is designed to test your ability to think and adapt. Let's see if your cleverness can truly keep you alive." Ethan felt the challenge in her words. She was testing him, trying to provoke him into showing weakness, but he wasn't going to fall for it. "I'll take my chances," he said, keeping his tone steady. As they set off toward the maze's entrance, Ethan couldn't help but admire Kizara's confidence. She seemed to exude a kind of quiet power, a certainty that only the strongest could possess. But he also knew this was his chance to show her that humans weren't as weak as she thought. The maze was even more dangerous than Ethan had imagined. The walls were made of a natural stone that seemed to shift and grow as they walked. At first, the path was clear, but then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet trembled, and new walls rose up, blocking their way. Kizara didn't seem bothered. She moved with ease, her long strides eating up the distance between them. Ethan, on the other hand, had to stop and think. The maze was alive, shifting with every step they took. He quickly realized that brute force wouldn't get him through. He needed to think his way out. As he paused to examine the walls, trying to predict their next move, Kizara called back to him. "Come on, human. You're wasting time. The path will close soon." Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied the terrain carefully. There was something about the way the stone walls seemed to pulse, a pattern he hadn't noticed at first. He stepped forward cautiously, then knelt down to touch the ground. The stone was warm beneath his fingertips. A subtle vibration ran through it. "Aha," Ethan muttered to himself. He stood up and quickly moved to the left. The wall shifted again, but this time, Ethan had already anticipated it. He was ahead of the maze, his quick thinking allowing him to stay one step ahead. Behind him, He heard Kisara's voice, louder now with a hint of amusement. "Not bad, human. But you won't win this with tricks alone." Ethan smiled. "We'll see about that." The maze was full of obstacles, trapdoors, sudden rock slides, and wild creatures that seemed to appear from nowhere. At one point, Ethan had to use his survival skills to navigate through a thicket of thorn-covered vines that blocked their way. Kisara simply plowed through, using her strength to break the branches, but Ethan found a safer, quieter path, avoiding the dangers that lurked in the shadows. Hours passed, and the maze became more treacherous. The heat of the planet was unrelenting, and the air grew thinner as they climbed higher into the mountains. Ethan could feel his energy draining, but he pressed on. His mind was clear, focused only on the task at hand. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they'd reached the center of the maze. Kisara was already there, standing tall with her arms crossed, waiting for him. "Well done, human," she said, her voice grudgingly respectful. "You've passed the first trial. But don't get too confident. The next one will test you in ways you can't imagine." Ethan, panting from the exertion, offered a tired smile. "I'm ready for whatever you've got." Kisara's eyes gleamed, her respect for him growing, though she wouldn't show it outright. "We'll see," she said, turning toward the next challenge. And so, the trials continued. Ethan had proven he could survive the maze, but he knew the hardest tests were yet to come. The second trial began the next morning, as the twin suns of Rastar Prime climbed high into the sky, casting long shadows over the jagged landscape. Ethan stood at the edge of a wide, rocky canyon, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the challenge ahead. The trial was clear now. He and Kisara were to face a wild beast, a creature native to Rastar Prime, known for its deadly speed and strength. Only those who could outwit or subdue the creature would pass the trial. The beast was called a Garva, a massive clawed predator that had terrorized local settlements for centuries. Its sleek, armored hide made it almost impervious to conventional weapons, and its agility was unmatched. It could leap over vast distances, striking from the shadows before its prey even realized it was in danger. Ethan had no illusions about his chances in a direct confrontation with the creature. He knew he couldn't hope to match the raw power of a Garva or the brute force of a Rastari warrior, but that didn't mean he was out of options. Humans had always survived by using their wits. Kisara stood beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon with the same sharp intensity she had shown during the first trial. She was eager, confident, and she wasn't about to let a human best her in something as basic as survival. "You ready?" she asked, her voice casual, though there was a note of challenge in her tone. Ethan nodded, "Ready as I'll ever be." "Good," she said, her golden eyes glinting with excitement. "The Garva hunts by scent and sound. You'll need to keep quiet and stay low. Let's see if your cleverness can get you out of this one." The words stung, but Ethan didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he focused on the task at hand. The Garva would be hunting them soon. They needed to set a trap, not chase the beast down. Ethan crouched low, his eyes scanning the area. The canyon was a maze of sharp rocks and narrow ledges, perfect for ambushes. He spotted a series of thick vines hanging down from the cliffs above. With a quick nod, he gestured for Kisara to follow him. Without a word, Kisara moved behind him, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the situation. She seemed to trust Ethan's instincts, though her pride still wouldn't let her admit it. They worked together, silently coordinating as they set up a trap. The plan was simple: use the Garva's natural hunting instincts against it. Ethan took a deep breath and placed himself in a position just off to the side of the narrow path the creature would most likely take. He had noticed earlier that the Garva favored this route, probably because it was less exposed and offered cover. Kisara, with her superior strength, used her spear to create a barrier of sharp, pointed rocks. For a moment, everything was still. The only sounds were the wind whistling through the canyon and the distant screech of other creatures calling to one another. Ethan's heart beat in his chest, But his mind was calm, focused. He didn't have Kizara's physical power, but he had something else, something that could make all the difference. Suddenly, there was a low growl from the shadows, followed by the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against stone. The Garva had appeared, its sleek form gliding swiftly across the canyon floor. It was larger than Ethan had imagined, its glowing yellow eyes scanning the area. Its powerful limbs rippled beneath its thick hide, and its jaws opened to reveal rows of sharp teeth. Ethan didn't move. He could feel the Garva's presence, its every step like a drumbeat in his chest. The creature's senses were incredibly sharp, but it was also highly territorial. Ethan knew that if they could make it feel threatened, it would fight back, exactly what they wanted. The Garva paused, sniffing the air. Its gaze turned toward Ethan, and for a moment, their eyes locked. It took a step forward, its muscles coiling, ready to pounce. But just as it lunged, Ethan triggered the trap. The vines above snapped tight, pulling large boulders from the ledge and sending them tumbling down toward the Garva. The creature let out an ear-piercing screech as it dodged the falling rocks, but in doing so, it stumbled right into the sharp barrier of rocks Kizara had set up. The Garva roared in fury as it tried to free itself from the thorny trap. It was fast, but it was also enraged, and its movements were erratic. This was Ethan's chance. With a quick hand signal, he instructed Kizara to move in. She rushed forward, her spear raised high, aiming for the creature's vulnerable underbelly. But before she could strike, the Garva lashed out, its claws narrowly missing her. Ethan didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward, ducking under the Garva's strike, and used the momentum of his run to grab a jagged rock from the ground. With all his strength, he hurled it at the creature's face, distracting it just long enough for Kizara to land a powerful blow. The Garva staggered, finally succumbing to the combined effort of the trap and their teamwork. It collapsed to the ground, panting heavily, defeated but still alive. Panting, Kizara looked at Ethan, a surprised glint in her eyes. "I didn't think you had it in you, human." Ethan stood over the creature, catching his breath. "I told you, strength isn't everything." For a brief moment, they shared a look, one that spoke volumes. Ethan had proven himself, not through physical strength, but through intelligence, strategy, and sheer determination. Kizara had underestimated him once again, but this time, there was no denying that he had earned her respect. "This trial is over," Kizara said, her voice softer than before. "You've earned the right to continue." Ethan nodded, his mind already turning toward the next challenge. But for the first time since landing on Rastar Prime, he allowed himself a moment to savor the victory. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a fiery glow over the rocky landscape of Rastar Prime as Ethan and Kizara made their way to the third and final trial. The first two trials had tested their survival skills and teamwork, but the last one would be different. It would test their minds and their ability to outsmart each other. The final trial was held in an ancient Rastari arena, a massive structure built into the side of a cliff, where generations of Rastari warriors had fought to prove their worth. The arena was vast, with towering walls that seemed to stretch into the sky. The ground was made of rough stone, worn smooth by countless battles. "We're here," Kizara said, her voice quiet but full of determination. She looked out over the arena, her golden eyes reflecting the fading light. "This trial will require more than just strength or survival. It's about strategy, intelligence." Ethan nodded, feeling the surge of excitement. He'd faced both the maze and the Garva with his wits, but this would be something different. It wasn't just about surviving a deadly environment or a wild creature anymore. This time, he would be facing Kizara herself in a contest of tactics. Kizara turned to him, her face set in a serious expression. "You've done well so far, human. But this is where it all comes down to your ability to outthink me. Can you match a Rastari warrior in a battle of strategy?" Ethan's smile was calm and confident. "I think I can handle it." Without another word, she gestured for him to follow her into the arena. The center was empty, save for a large stone table that stood at the far end. There were no weapons in sight, just a simple set of chess-like pieces arranged neatly on the table. Kizora moved toward it, her long, powerful legs moving with ease. "This is a test of strategic thinking," she explained, glancing back at him. "Each piece on this board represents an asset, a troop, a resource, a position. The goal is simple: take the enemy's flag, and you win. But each move has consequences. Choose wisely." Ethan studied the board carefully. The game was much more complicated than the simple chess games he played back on Earth. The pieces weren't just about position. They also represented real-world resources, military strength, and even terrain advantages. He'd need to think several moves ahead, just like a general commanding an army. Kizara began first, moving one of her pieces with deliberate care. "I'll start with a simple advance," she said, her voice full of confidence. She didn't even glance at Ethan, certain in her own strategic prowess. Ethan watched carefully, but didn't rush. He knew that the key to winning this game wasn't in speed. It was in understanding the long-term impact of each move. He could feel the weight of the trial, the pressure to outsmart Kizara, to prove that humans weren't just physical beings. They were thinkers too. After a few minutes of quiet contemplation, Ethan made his first move. He shifted a piece to a seemingly unimportant position, but the action was deliberate. It opened up several potential opportunities for the next few moves, and he could already see the path ahead. Kizara glanced at him, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly. She had expected him to make a quick move, something obvious. Instead, he had started with a subtle strategy, something she hadn't anticipated. For the next several turns, the game continued, each move more intense than the last. Kizara and Ethan exchanged only the briefest words. She was focused, every motion precise, and calculated. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed to approach the game from a different angle. He didn't always make the most obvious moves, but there was a quiet brilliance to his choices. He played to his strengths: patience, observation, and the ability to adapt quickly. With each turn, the game became more tense. Kizara's pieces were aggressive, pushing forward relentlessly, while Ethan's seemed to circle, wait, and strike when the time was right. It wasn't long before Kizara realized that her aggressive approach might not be enough to outmaneuver Ethan's more subtle tactics. "Not bad, human," she muttered under her breath, her pride unable to completely hide her respect for his skills. She had underestimated him earlier, thinking him too small and too weak. But now she was seeing just how sharp his mind really was. The minutes stretched on. The pieces on the board slowly dwindled as each side gained and lost ground. Ethan's strategic thinking had slowly begun to chip away at Kizara's aggressive advances. His position was tightening, his moves more unpredictable than she could account for. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ethan made his move. It was a simple shift, one that seemed almost like a mistake. But in that moment, he had anticipated her every counter. The move opened up an entire flank of her forces, leaving her vulnerable. Kizara froze, staring at the board. She knew in that instant that she had lost. Ethan had outsmarted her, not with brute force, but with intelligence and patience. For a moment, the arena was silent. Then, Kizara slowly looked up at Ethan, her golden eyes softening. "You won," she said, her voice quiet but filled with something new: respect. Ethan grinned, feeling a rush of triumph. He hadn't just survived the trials. He had proven that humans could be more than just warriors. "I told you," he said, his voice light. "It's not always about strength." Kizara smiled, a genuine smile this time. "I see that now. Well played, human." As the trial came to an end, the weight of the challenge lifted from Ethan's shoulders. He had won. But more importantly, he had earned Kizara's respect, and perhaps even her admiration. With the third trial behind them, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. His victory against Kisora in the arena had earned him her respect, but there was no time to relax. The trials weren't over yet. The Rastari had made it clear that only those who could survive everything they threw at them would be worthy of the ultimate reward. Ethan had expected more tests, but nothing could prepare him for what came next. The day after the trial, Kisora led him to a clearing surrounded by towering trees. The air was thick with humidity, and the sound of distant creatures echoed through the dense forest. This place was completely different from the harsh mountains or the dry desert where they had faced the Garva. It was almost peaceful, except for the faint tension in the air. "We're entering the final phase of the trials," Kisora said, her voice firm. "This is the hardest one. You'll need everything you've learned so far. Your wits, your strength, your endurance. It will test every aspect of who you are." Ethan's heart raced. After everything they had already been through, he wondered how much more he could handle, but he didn't let his doubts show. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to quit now. Kisora stepped forward, her gaze scanning the trees. "The trial is simple. We enter the forest, and we must survive. There are no rules, no guides, no escape. Only one will emerge from this trial." Ethan nodded, swallowing the lump that had formed in his throat. He had no choice but to trust Kisora's word. He had seen how relentless the Rastari were, and he could feel the weight of this final challenge pressing down on him. "Ready?" Kisora asked, her golden eyes gleaming. "As ready as I'll ever be," Ethan replied, keeping his voice steady. Without warning, she moved forward into the forest, and Ethan followed closely behind. The dense trees made the air thick and heavy, and the ground was soft beneath their feet. Every now and then, they would hear rustling sounds in the distance, the unmistakable sounds of wildlife watching their every move. It was then that Ethan realized just how much danger they were in. The Rastari weren't only testing his ability to survive. They were testing his ability to think on his feet when everything seemed stacked against him. The first few hours in the forest were relatively uneventful. The heat was stifling, and the humidity made it hard to breathe, but Ethan could still handle it. Kisora moved ahead, taking the lead as always, but he noticed that she kept glancing back at him from time to time, as if assessing his progress. After they had made their way deeper into the forest, they arrived at a small, bubbling stream. The water was cool and clear, a welcome change from the suffocating heat of the forest. "We'll rest here for a bit," Kisora said, "but don't get too comfortable. The forest doesn't like visitors, and we can't afford to waste time." Ethan nodded, knowing she was right. They couldn't afford to stop for long. Every moment spent resting could be a moment when danger lurked around them. As they took a break, Ethan began to take stock of their surroundings. The stream was small, and the forest around them felt eerily quiet, as if the creatures that normally populated it had vanished. He had learned from his earlier trials that nothing in this world was ever as it seemed. He needed to stay alert. Suddenly, there was a rustling sound behind them. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he turned to face the noise. Kisora's hand shot out, grabbing his arm and pulling him into the shadows of a nearby tree. "Stay quiet," she whispered urgently. Ethan's eyes widened as he saw what had caused the noise. A massive, six-legged creature with glowing red eyes and sharp, insect-like mandibles emerged from the underbrush. It was easily 3 times the size of a human, its body covered in hard, spiny armor. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had never seen anything like it before. The creature sniffed the air, its antennae twitching. It was hunting. Kisora's hand tightened on his arm, and she motioned for him to stay perfectly still. The creature's head swung around, its eyes locking onto their hiding spot. For a moment, Ethan felt like the creature could sense them. But then, after what seemed like an eternity, the creature turned and slowly moved away, disappearing into the underbrush. Kisora let out a quiet sigh of relief. "We're lucky it didn't see us. That's a Koreth, a deadly predator, even for the Rastari." Ethan swallowed hard. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. That was too close. "What now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We move on," Kizara said simply. "We can't afford to stop again. We got to stay ahead of the predators and keep our wits sharp. It's only going to get more dangerous from here." Ethan nodded, his determination returning. He had already come this far, and there was no way he was turning back now. As they moved deeper into the forest, the atmosphere grew even more tense. The sounds of the creatures grew louder, and the air felt thicker with each step. Ethan knew they were being hunted, and he had to stay sharp to survive. They encountered more creatures as they pressed on, a pack of aggressive, wolf-like beasts with razor-sharp claws, and a giant, shadowy figure that loomed over them, its glowing eyes watching them from a distance. But with every encounter, Ethan's confidence grew. He was learning how to think and react quickly, just as he had in the previous trials. Finally, after what seemed like an endless journey through the dark and dangerous forest, they reached the edge of the woods. The forest had tested them in ways Ethan couldn't have imagined, but they had made it through. Kizara stopped, her eyes scanning the horizon. "You've done it, human. You've passed the trial." Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He had survived. He had made it. But as he looked at Kizara, he knew the true test wasn't over yet. This trial had been a test of survival, but the real challenge was still ahead. Earning the respect of the Rastari, and proving that a human was worthy of standing among their greatest warriors. After surviving the final trial in the forest, Ethan stood at the edge of the clearing, the heavy weight of the last few days pressing on his shoulders. The challenge had been brutal, no more illusions about it. The Rastari were fierce, and their trials had tested every ounce of his physical and mental strength. Yet here he was, still standing, still breathing, and still determined to prove his worth. Kizara stood beside him, watching the horizon. The setting sun bathed the land in warm hues of orange and red, a stunning sight after the harsh trials. Her gaze, however, was focused on something else. She seemed to be calculating, waiting for the final word, the moment when Ethan's place among the Rastari would be decided. Ethan felt a twinge of uncertainty. Despite having won each challenge, he still wasn't sure if he had done enough. The Rastari were known for their pride, their strength, and their warrior culture. It wasn't just about surviving the trials. It was about proving that he belonged among them. Could a human truly earn that respect? As they stood together, the silence between them was almost tangible. Ethan glanced at Kizara, his expression determined. What happens now? Kizara turned to him, her golden eyes studying him carefully. For the first time since the trials had begun, she seemed uncertain. Not in her ability to win the challenges, but in how she truly viewed him. Ethan had survived when many others would have failed. He had outwitted and outlasted everything the Rastari had thrown at him. "The final decision isn't mine to make," she said quietly. "There is one last test, but this one, it's different. You have to prove your worth to the entire Rastari Council." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "The Council?" "Yes," she replied, her voice steady but serious. "The elders, the warriors, the leaders, they must decide whether you are worthy to join us, to be one of us." Ethan felt the weight of her words settle over him. The Rastari Council was legendary, a group of powerful beings who had shaped their civilization. Their judgment was final, and if they didn't accept him, then everything he had worked for would be in vain. "How does it work?" Ethan asked, his voice calm despite the anxiety swirling inside him. Kizara met his gaze. "You will face the Council in a final test of character. It's not a battle or a trial of strength. It's a challenge of your spirit. You will need to show them that you understand what it means to be a Rastari, to live, fight, and die for something greater than yourself." Ethan's mind raced. A test of spirit. What did that even mean? The trials had been physical, they had been tactical, but this was something entirely different. He knew he could handle physical challenges. He had done so in every trial. But this This would require him to dig deep inside himself and show who he truly was. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Ethan admitted, though he had to push the words out. "I'm human. I'm not one of you." Kizara's gaze softened, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something, perhaps compassion or understanding, in her eyes. "You've already proven that you're more than just human. You've survived, and you've shown the strength of your character. That's what the Rasteri respect. If you can't prove yourself now, then nothing else will matter." Ethan nodded. Her words were a comfort, but they also made the weight of the moment feel heavier. This was it, the final test. The Rasteri Council would decide everything. They made their way to the Rasteri city, a towering structure carved into the sides of a massive mountain. The city was alive with energy, warriors and citizens moving through its stone streets, but there was an eerie silence that surrounded the council chamber. It was clear that this was where everything would be decided. Inside, the room was large, its walls lined with ancient carvings that told the story of the Rasteri's history. At the center of the room, a stone podium stood, flanked by towering figures, the elders and warriors of the council. They looked down at Ethan, their expressions stern and unreadable. "Approach," one of them commanded, their voice deep and commanding. Ethan's heart raced, but he stepped forward, standing tall despite the nervousness that threatened to overwhelm him. This was his moment. The lead elder spoke, his voice resonating in the quiet chamber. "Human, you have faced our trials. You have survived, but survival alone does not make one worthy. Tell us, what is your spirit, your true nature? What is it that makes you strong?" Ethan took a deep breath. This was it. He had no script, no plan, only his own truth. He stood tall, his voice steady as he spoke. "I've always believed that strength isn't just about physical power or being the fastest. It's about resilience. It's about pushing forward, even when everything tells you to stop. I faced challenges that seemed impossible, but I never gave up. Because I believe that the greatest strength comes from the will to keep going, no matter how small you are, no matter how much others doubt you." There was a long silence after his words, and for a moment, Ethan wasn't sure if he had said the right thing. But then, the council members exchanged looks, their expressions thoughtful. The lead elder nodded slowly. "You have spoken with wisdom. Your spirit is strong, human. You have earned your place among us." Ethan's heart leaped in his chest. The council had accepted him. He had done it. Kizara stepped forward, her face a mixture of pride and respect. "You've proven that even a small being can be a giant in spirit. Welcome, human, to the Rasteri." As the council granted him their blessing, Ethan couldn't help but smile. He had not only survived the trials, but he had earned the respect of one of the most powerful warrior races in the galaxy. And more importantly, he had shown them something they hadn't expected. A human could be more than just a survivor. A human could be a warrior, too.